Hello! In today's episode, we are starting a brand new series of Ask Lisa. You can send in any questions you might have on newborn photography. You can post in the comments below, and we're going to be answering some questions. So today I'm going to be talking about blur, bokeh, depth of field. Sometimes when you're getting started, it is really hard to wrap your head around this stuff. So we're going to make it super easy for you to understand in today's episode. Hello, if we haven't met, I'm Lisa from Milk and Honey Photography and the Milky Way, and I empower, educate, and inspire photographers just like you to create the business, life, and art of their dreams. So today we're starting a brand new series called Ask Lisa. And recently I've been having a few questions that have been floating in, so we thought, why not make it a bit of a series? So the first question that came through is, Dear Lisa, when you get that blurred look in the background, is that your camera or Photoshop? I have the 50mm lens and use that for my newborn sessions, but I just can't seem to get that blur that you get. Can you help? I absolutely can. So the first thing I want to talk about is lens selection. A lot of the times when we're getting started with newborn photography, we may be starting with our first camera and we may be using a kit lens. With a kit lens, sometimes you don't get that large aperture that you need like in newborn photography. I typically use the 50mm lens, and there are expensive versions and there's cheaper versions. Both will work great. The 50mm typically goes down to 1.8, and I like to shoot wide open, and that is part of the reason that I get the blur, is because I have that large aperture. I'm letting lots of light into the lens, and I'm able to get that. That's the way the lens works. Now, if you're using a 50mm, make sure that you are stopping down to f2 or 1.8, and that is step one. Now, another reason that you may not be getting the blur is because of your depth of field. Now, what this means is when you're stopped down, there is just that shallow depth of field of things that are going to be in focus. Now, with having that nice large aperture with like an f2 or f1.8, typically things behind or in front will be out of focus, which creates that blur that you want. So try stopping down with your 50mm first. Now the next key thing that I remember when I first wrapped my brain around this, it made so much sense and it totally works. So I'm talking about the distance between you and your subject to the background. Now if you have your subject completely against the background, there is no room for anything to be blurry behind them. Now, if you pull them, say 4 feet forward, you have all this yummy room back here that you're going to have for that blur. So my first tip is to, instead of having, if you're shooting, say, a newborn in a prop and you've got them right against the wall, pull them further away from the wall, approximately 3 to 4 feet, and try that. Now, the big thing is the distance between you and your subject to the background. You need to have this area of your subject to the background needs to be bigger than the distance between you and your subject for you to get that blur. If the distance between the subject and the background is smaller, you're not going to have the opportunity for that blur to happen because that's just how the lenses work. You need that distance for you to be able to get that blur. So if you find you're struggling with your blankets on your beanbag when you're posing your babies and you're just finding that you're not getting that bokeh behind them, check where your blankets are. If they're too close to your baby, you're going to run into the issue, the same thing. You don't have that distance behind them to create that blur. So no matter how low you are with your f-stop, if you're at a 1.8 and totally wide open, if you don't have that distance behind them, you're just not going to get that blur. So make sure that you have a parent holding them or maybe a backdrop stand, creating that longer run so you can have the blankets gradually blur out instead of having them directly behind them. So when you're shooting with your 50mm, make sure that you are fairly close to your newborn. You don't want to be too far back. And the reason for that is if you're too far away, you're just not going to have that depth of focus and that depth of field that you need to get the blur. The closer you are to your subject, the bigger opportunity you're going to have that blur behind them and to have it in the foreground, which is the front as well. Now my rule of thumb is I like to double the distance between my subject and my background than myself and my subject. So my homework to you is to go get a prop or a bucket or just a doll, and I want you to take some images. I want you to set your camera and your lens, your 50 millimeter, to f1.8 if you can get it to stop down that low. If you're working with a zoom lens, it typically will not go that low. Some zoom lenses go down to 2.8, so you may want that distance to be even greater. Just so the greater that distance between the subject and the background, the larger opportunity you're going to have that blur occur. But always remember that you need to be closer to your subject than that background is. So your homework is to go and get that doll. I want you to measure the wall, and so from your subject, I want you to do the first one with it right against the wall, and I want you to take that image. The next one I want you to do 2 feet from your subject against the wall. I want you to do a 4 foot with subject from against the wall, and I want you to see the difference. I want you to make sure that you're keeping your distance between your subject at about 2 feet and just see how your images change. So thank you to Joey for writing that in. I'm so thrilled we were able to cover this today. I hope this answers your questions, and don't forget to practice so you can figure out how that blur works. Thank you so much for watching today. If you have not already, make sure that you download our free posing guide. It's in the description below. And if you haven't yet, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss a single trick, tip, or tutorial. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.